Queerguru TV. Neil Bartlett, writer, director, performer. I don't know what it is or else you've done. You're one of these people that have done so much, but I feel I should have had another life if I had half your talent. You sort of exhaust me reading it through there. So we're here today to talk about your fifth novel, which is to be published next month, called Address Book, which is 7 different lives, 7 different times, 7 different ways. I love the cover. In strange places. But could you tell me briefly, in your words, how you would describe it?
I called it Address Book because I wanted to say to people, have you ever wondered what was inside Neil Bartlett's Address Book? And what is inside Neil Bartlett's Address Book is 7 stories, each of which takes place at a real address in my life. Oh, right. All of the front doors are real front doors. But what I've done is I've gone back to each of those buildings and I've created a fictional life in a real place. I didn't want to write an autobiography. I wanted to write a bigger story than that. So, for instance, one of the stories takes place actually in this room where I'm talking to you right now, but in 1881. There's a building up in Camden Down where I lived in the early 80s. It was really a slum when I was a nightclub kid. I was squatting on the top floor. But what I've written about is the life of a young, pregnant, straight woman in 1967. Who discovers that she thinks she's got a man downstairs who might be queer, and she doesn't know how to deal with that. In a flat where I lived on top of a tower block in Hackney, again in the 80s, at the height of the AIDS epidemic, I've jumped from a time in my life which was very dark to a time in my life which is incredibly happy, and I've written about the after party of a civil partnership ceremony. So I've used the addresses to time travel through 7 decades of extraordinary change in our queer lives. From 1881, when someone can hardly breathe because they are thinking about another man's body, to the last story in the book, which is about someone who, like me, has been lucky enough to share their life with just one other person for 30-something years, and now they've lost them. That story's set in the present. So it's a bit, Neil Bartlett's Address Book is a TARDIS. It's a time travel through queer history.
Going back to your very first book, which was Who Was That Man?, which showed how gay history in London in the 1980s affected your life as a gay man in the 1980s. Why was writing that so important to you at the time?
At the time it was written, that first book, it's very interesting while I've been writing this one, because now I'm 63, and when I started the first book, I was 23. I've changed, and boy, the world has changed.
Absolutely.
But always my books are a conversation with my times. And back in the early 1980s, the question was, how are we going to survive? I mean, people were starting to die, and more importantly, in a way, we were living through a time of incredibly active homophobia. I mean, it wasn't just your neighbors, it was the broadcast media, it was the church, it was the state, it was the police. The question was, how are we going to get through these dark times? And so I went back to the person who, when I came out to my mother, she was the only other gay man she'd ever heard of, which was Oscar Wilde, who went through the darkest possible night of the queer soul in the space of just 2 months. He had his whole life torn apart. And so I went back to his story to find out, how do queers survive darkness? Literally, that book is me asking him for his advice. And through turning to him, I discovered there was, in fact, a whole story of an incredibly rich culture of which he was just one part. And it was that richness which gave me, and hopefully the readers of the book, the strength to survive the dark days.
Yeah.
And this one, 40 years later, is saying, so, okay, people keep telling us we've reached the promised land. Gay liberation, schliberation, we've done it. It's over. We're free. And I wanted to say, how do we feel? How do we feel when we speak to our ancestors? And what do they tell us? What does a young gay school teacher in 1880 have to tell me? Well, he has to tell me that shame never changes, but also the courage never changes. What do two glorious dykes with all their dyke and trans friends celebrating their civil partnership on top of a tower block in Hackney have to tell me? They have to tell me that it feels like vertigo, that suddenly my country has turned round to me and said, oh, we didn't mean it. We love you. You've always been a first-class citizen. Well, for 35 years of my life, I was a second-class citizen. And now to have people turn around and tell me, oh, yeah, civil partnership, it's no big deal. It's such a big deal that on the morning of my civil partnership, when the registrar said, are you ready now for the ceremony? I staggered. I literally, for a moment, I lost my footing. And that's where that story comes from.
Yeah.
So I believe it's my job as a peer and mentor, as a borderline senior in our gorgeous queer community. It behoves us as people with grey facial hair to be the carrier of the stories. No. And not just the story of last week and not just the story of our lives, but the unheard stories. And that's why the dominant image of the book is a front door. Like everybody else, if I walk down a street I don't know at night and I see the windows lit, I go, what's the story in each of those houses? And this book is a partial answer to this question. It takes you behind the door and lets you eavesdrop on the story.
Which is something very dear to us here at Queerguru. We really do like to cover anything that covers our history because it's important to us in culturally or politically. You know, just if you don't know your politics, just not to know who Jennifer Holliday is, it's sad. So it's important to get that. And I love the fact that we have so much good and documentaries coming out now that can using archival footage that can remember, not that we need to dwell, but it's important to me who I am because of that. But you've done many things and we've never met before, but I think I said to you in an email, one of the many hats you wore was artistic director at the Lyric in Hammersmith.
That's right.
And thanks to you, you brought culture to me. I had a wonderful evening in a very odd part of London with not a good theatrical tradition. So you've enjoyed the challenges of not just queer culture, but bringing culture elsewhere. What drives you to do that?
One, I don't know how to earn a living any other way. I've been working as an artist now since 1982, so I don't know how many years that is, too many. Passion, love, hope, courage. But I'm inspired. I want to share my inspiration. I mean, just to tell you a tiny thing from the book, the story that's set in the room that I'm speaking to you now from, set back in 1881, involves a queer school teacher, and he takes a photograph of a an almost naked young man. It becomes the center of his obsession. And where that story comes from is I discovered that the very great, weird and wonderful English gay novelist called Frederick Rolfe, who once wrote an amazing novel called Hadrian VII, which if you've never heard of it or read it, go check it out, children. It's about a gay man becoming Pope back in the 19th century. It's fabulous. Anyway, I discovered that Frederick Rolfe took photographs of semi-naked boys in 1881. He bought the chemicals and paper from those photographs from a place called Turnmill Street, which is just down the road from here, which is where the biggest queer nightclub of the E-decade trade was located. And his models were often Italian boys. And this building, this living room, is in a block which in the 1880s was occupied by London's Italian communities, and many of them worked as artist model. Now, how could I not write a story about those things? Because I still remember being 16 and discovering a paperback copy of Our Lady of the Flowers in a bookshop on the way home from school. I still remember going to a gay bar for the first time and seeing a great drag queen. And the way those experiences as a young man and also still as a man of my age, they set your heart ablaze. How could I not try and do that for a living? I want to give those people those moments. And I know it works. I mean, you talked about the lyric Hammersmith. Several times a year, someone will come up to me in a bar or at a bus stop and say, sorry, you don't know me, but once I came to one of your shows and I remember this moment where this person did this. And that's what I know. That's my job, is to give people to pay back the inspiration. That's what gets me up in the morning.
But let's give you credit for another thing as well. You're an award-nominated author, but you've chosen to publish your 5th novel with a small independent queer publisher, Inkandescent, which you should be applauded for that. Why did you make that choice?
I made that choice because I've been published by different people in the course of my career. I started off with a small independent who then became very big and famous. My last book was published by a big mainstream commercial publisher. I felt this book needed special care, special love, not to be part of a big commercial operation. It's a love child. I want it to be handled very carefully. And also I wanted to work with a queer publisher because this book is so queer, it can hardly walk. I didn't want to edit it with someone who would say, for instance, do you think the reader really wants a graphic description of sex between a 15-year-old boy and a man twice his age on page 11? I didn't want to. I wanted to work with someone who would say, oh my God, that scene with the boy, it's so beautiful. And you know, that happened to me too. And isn't it wonderful when you have your first great sexual experience? So it was very important to be in a queer environment. And also, I met the boys who run Inkandescent, and Nathan and Justin, and I love their energy and I love their pitch, which is to say, it's not true that all the battles are won and anyone can get published anywhere. We still need a space that proudly proclaims, this is ours, this is different, This is for the smaller voice, the stranger voice, the voice that taps on your shoulder instead of the voice that stands in the middle of the street. And I really respond to that ambition to say it's a marriage of small is beautiful and queer is beautiful. And I think also the times we live in, there's a real potency in the small and the dedicated and the passionate. And that's really where I've always done my best work.
It's one of the reasons that we're talking to you today, because of their passion encouraged me, and I didn't need a lot of encouragement, but I love to support things like that. I hope the book's an enormous success for you. It's totally fascinating, and I hope people this side of it, we are seen in 46 countries, but I hope the people this side of this side of the pond read it too, because it's a fascinating look at London as well. Thank you for finding the time to talk to us today, and hope to see you again soon.
It's been really wonderful to talk to you, Roger. Thank you for your time and for your questions. And I really appreciate the support that you're giving me and the new book. Cheers.